Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to absolutely demystify the intellectual and aesthetic origins of New York punk rock. Now, when most people hear the word punk, they instantly picture spontaneous chaos, maybe 3 chords, and just this massive explosion of uneducated noise, right? Well, today, we're actually going to use the source material to prove that early punk was a highly literate, very deliberate rebellion. And to truly master the concepts behind this cultural alchemy, we're going to break the whole thing down into 3 distinct steps: tracing its literary roots, decoding its intentional aesthetics, and finally, analyzing its sonic deconstruction. So let's just dive right in with a bit of a cold open. Think about this defining lyric from Richard Hell, who was a really central figure in the 1970s New York underground. He sang, "I belong to the blank generation, and I can take it or leave it each time." Those exact words instantly galvanized the entire anti-establishment attitude of the decade. But where did that profound sense of detachment actually come from? Because it definitely wasn't born in a vacuum. Section 1. Roots, the beat generation. Okay, so step 1 in mastering this concept, we have to trace punk's intellectual DNA all the way back to the literary rebels of the 1940s. There's this amazing chronological bridge connecting the early beats directly to the epicenter of 70s underground rock. Back in the 1940s, guys like Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and William S. Burroughs were meeting up at Columbia University to explore New York's grimy underbelly. Fast forward a bit to the 1960s, and a young poet named Richard Hell arrives in that very same city with some big literary ambitions of his own. By 1974, bands like the Ramones and television are playing their first gigs. So punk is literally the direct cultural heir to the beat movement. And the specific beat writer who influenced punk the most, that would absolutely be William S. Burroughs. See, while writers like Kerouac and Ginsberg were seeking this kind of spiritual transcendence, which, eventually inspired the hippie counterculture, Burroughs harbored a much, much darker worldview. He championed this whole philosophy of anti-control and fearless unattachment. Basically, Burroughs completely rejected societal labels, seeing them just as mechanisms for societal control. Richard Hell read Burroughs religiously, and this exact concept of operating from no assumptions, of just rejecting the system entirely, became the core philosophy of early punk. Section 2. Richard Hell invents punk. Which brings us to step 2 in mastering the punk concept: decoding the intentional aesthetics. How exactly does literary nihilism translate into a physical, real-world reality? Well, far from being just uneducated chaos, Richard Hell's iconic look was this incredibly calculated, semiotic rebellion. His spiky hair wasn't just him forgetting to find a comb in the morning. He was actively inspired by the French poet Antonin Artaud and a character from a François Truffaut film. Even the torn clothes and the safety pins were deliberate choices. As the sociologist Dick Hebdige pointed out, subcultures challenge hegemony obliquely through style. So Hell was basically amalgamating these elements to visually represent the fragmented, anti-control reality that he was writing about. But here's the crucial turning point, the ideological split that happens when this aesthetic crosses the Atlantic. Remember, Richard Hell wrote about the blank generation, and for him, being blank was empowering. It's like a literal blank canvas, a total rejection of societal labels that hands the individual the ultimate power to define themselves. But when this attitude reached the UK, the Sex Pistols released Pretty Vacant. And vacant was just derivative, reactive apathy. I mean, they ended their chorus simply stating, "We don't care." So the American roots of punk were actually deeply intellectual and totally focused on self-definition, rather than just simple nihilism. Section 3. CBGB, the epicenter. Now, an ideology needs a physical home to actually become a movement, right? And in a wonderful piece of irony, Hilly Crystal opened his legendary club in the middle of this severe economic decline in Lower Manhattan, fully intending to host entirely different genres. CBGB and OMFUG literally stands for country, bluegrass, blues, and other music for uplifting gormandizers. In case you're wondering, a gormandizer is just a voracious eater of music. Crystal absolutely did not set out to create a punk club, but the insanely cheap rent and his open-door policy made it the perfect incubator for something totally unprecedented. But what made CBGB so crucial wasn't the specific genre of music. It was the strict rule Crystal enforced. Bands had to play original music. No way, no how were cover bands allowed. And that mandate created a really historic platform. It gave marginalized, highly creative youth a physical space to finally say, "Hey, listen to me, this is who I am." It wasn't about being a virtuoso rock star at all. It was about this raw, visceral need for young people to be heard on their own terms. And that's an incredible legacy of preserving youth voices that educational initiatives like Teach Rock are actively maintaining today. Section 4.
the sound of television.
So with the scene set at CBGB, we arrive at step 3 for mastering the punk concept, analyzing the actual musical complexities. And we're going to look specifically at Richard Hell's early group Television. There is a staggering sonic contrast between the bloated corporate rock of the 1970s and what Television accomplished on their seminal album, Marquee Moon. Rather than just leaning on standard major scales, blues riffs, or those heavy blue notes, Television's guitarists, Tom Verlaine and Richard Lloyd, employed this shockingly economical style of playing. They wrapped their songs in really complex mixolydian modes, deliberately dropping the 7th note by half a step, and they utilized intricate descending scales instead of your standard rock solos. It was tight, it probably seemed illogical to standard rock players at the time, and it was incredibly avant-garde.
And the lyrics? Just as sophisticated. Critics actually celebrated the music for capturing a multivalence worthy of that adventure's complexity. Frontman Tom Verlaine drew super heavily on French poetry to narrate the raw consciousness and the utter confusion of an experience, rather than just spoon-feeding the listener a straight linear story. His lyrics evoked what he called a little moment of discovery. So here again we see this profound literary influence shaping the very structure and the delivery of the music itself.
Section 5. Beyond Punk. No Wave. Of course, the raw, original energy of CBGB couldn't stay contained to traditional rock instruments forever. As the 1970s progressed, some musicians started feeling like even punk was becoming too formulaic, and this evolved into no wave. No wave was this stylistically cohesive avant-rock movement in New York that just completely rejected commercialism in favor of pure, abrasive sonic experimentation. They broke all the conventional limits by utilizing extended techniques, literally playing instruments in unconventional ways, using prepared guitars, and openly embracing dissonance. It was pretty much the ultimate logical extreme of Burroughs' anti-control philosophy, but applied directly to sound itself. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. Now that we've mastered the concepts behind this movement, by tracing its deep literary roots in the Beat Generation, decoding its inspiration from avant-garde aesthetics, and analyzing its deliberate, complex musical deconstruction, we really have to ask ourselves, was punk rock merely an explosion of noise? Or was it actually the most deliberate, literate, artistic reaction of the 20th century? Because when you really look at the source material, the blank canvas of punk reveals an absolute masterpiece of intentional rebellion. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I sincerely hope this completely changes how you listen to the Blank Generation.